Section 2 of the Indian Storybook. The Indian Storybook by Richard Wilson. Story 1, Rama's Quest, Parts 3 and 4. Part 3. After a long journey, they came to the borders of the great forest through which the sacred Ganges flows, where they dismissed the charioteer, giving him many tender messages to their friends in the royal city. They now began the life of the forest hermit, and did not seek to relieve themselves of any of its hardships. Dressed in their coats of bark, they made their way to the bank of the river, where they happened to find a boat, which they entered. They crossed the broad stream and plunged into the depths of the dark forest, walking always in single file with Sita in the middle. A little later they came to another stream, which they crossed on a raft made by themselves of the trunks of saplings, and, choosing a pleasant spot on the side of a wooded hill, they built a humble cottage of wood and thatched it with leaves. Here they settled down to the hermit's life, living on the game in which the forest abounded, and the fruits which grew in great profusion near their dwelling. Meanwhile, in faraway Ayodhya, events of great importance were taking place. The exile of Rama preyed so much upon the mind of the old king that he died, and his son Bharata was called to the throne. Now this great-hearted prince had been absent from home for a long time, and when he returned he was filled with grief and wrath at the banishment of Rama, and he bitterly reproached his mother for her cruel jealousy. He refused to become king, and after burying his father with careful attention to all the necessary rites and due observance of historic customs, he made preparations for a journey to the forest, where he hoped to find his brother and bring him back in triumph to rule in his father's place. A great company of princes, courtiers, nobles, and people of the city prepared to set out with him, and before long they were on the way through the forest, and, directed by a hermit whom they met, they crossed the two broad rivers and passed on to the wooded hill on the side of which the royal exile had made his humble home. After a long journey they found the prince sitting in his cottage, his hair long and matted like a hermit's, dressed in the black skin of a deer and a well-worn garment of bark. Bharata greeted him with lowly reverence, and told him of the death of his father, which so affected the prince that he fell down in a swoon, and was with difficulty revived by Sita and his brothers. Then Bharata seated himself before Rama and begged him with tears in his eyes to come back to Ayodhya and take his rightful place as king of the city. Rama refused to do this, preferring to spend in exile the full term of years appointed by his father. "Give me, then," said Bharata, "the gold-worked sandals from your feet. I will carry them back to Ayodhya as a token that I am your viceroy, and I will rule in your name until the years of exile are ended." So the prince returned with his friends to the city and undertook the work of government in the name and under the authority of Rama. The years passed on, but the exiles did not remain in the same pleasant spot. They left their cottage after a while and wandered onward from hermitage to hermitage. In one of these retreats they found an old man and his wife, who had won great magic powers by their severity of life, and the old woman welcomed the beautiful Sita with open arms. The two women spent several days in quiet conversation, and when the travellers were preparing to go on their way, the elder said to the younger, "See, little one, I have a present for you. Let me dress you and adorn you in a manner suitable to your rank." Then she brought out a beautiful dress of silk with costly ornaments and a garland of lovely flowers, and she took great delight in dressing and adorning the beautiful young princess, standing away from her to admire the effect of her loving handiwork. On went the travellers greatly comforted and refreshed. Now as they passed from place to place, Rama heard many stories of the evil deeds of the monsters known as Rakshasas, who were the inveterate foes of gods and men, and especially of holy hermits. And many were the appeals to Rama to free the forest from these dreadful beings. One day the exiles came upon one of these monsters, whose terrible ugliness defies description, and who was holding spellbound with a single spear a great crowd of wild animals of the forest. When he saw the beautiful princess, he at once snatched her up in his arms and turned to carry her off. But in a moment Rama's bow was busy, though his task was rendered difficult owing to the necessity for avoiding those parts of the monster's body which were protected by the form of his beloved wife. So well, however, did he and his brother ply their bows, that the Rakshasa dropped the princess, seized both his foes, placed them across his broad shoulders, and turned towards a forest path which led to a gloomy recess. Then the air was rent with the piercing cries of Sita, which had such a stirring effect upon the brothers that with a mighty effort they broke from the monster's grasp and attacked him with their fists. There was a fierce encounter, which ended in the death of the grisly foe, and the heroes, having rested for a while, went on their way rejoicing. Part 4. At the next hermitage on their way, the exiles were granted a vision which filled them with strength and contentment, for they saw the chief of the gods seated in a shining chariot, drawn by green horses and protected from the rays of the sun by a broad canopy supported by maidens of surpassing beauty. As soon as the three travellers appeared, the splendid vision vanished, and the hermit who had been so favoured came from his cell. He was a very old man, and his eyes seemed to be looking far away into space. Rama spoke to him, but without a word in reply he sprang into a fire which had been kindled before his hut. In a few moments the hermit's worn and wasted body disappeared, and he stood up in the form of a young man of glorious beauty and godlike strength. Then, mounting upwards as if borne by unseen hands, he disappeared in the clouds and left the exiles wondering. Now the encounter with the Rakshasa had filled the heart of Sita with tender fears for her husband's safety, and she lovingly tried to persuade him to avoid any further contests with these fierce and relentless foes. "It is your fearless bearing and the fearful appearance of your mighty bow," she said, "which provokes these dreadful creatures. Let me tell you a tale which proves the truth of my words. Many years ago there lived in the woods a hermit who was so severe upon himself that even the chief of the gods schemed to frustrate him. So he took the form of a warrior and visited the saint in his cell, leaving with him on his departure his sword in sacred trust. The hermit was so careful to guard the treasure that he carried it with him wherever he went, and its possession made him so warlike and quarrelsome that he forsook the saintly life and fell a victim to his foes. Rama smiled as he listened to the artless story, and gently told the princess that it was his bounden duty to act as guardian to the peaceful hermits of the forest, and that he meant to use his warlike weapon until the place was entirely freed from the Rakshasas. So the years went by in combat and rest, effort and refreshment, facing of danger and winning of victory. At one time Lakshmana built a large clay hut propped on pillars and provided with a real floor of wood, in which they lived happily for some time until a certain giantess, enraged at the beauty of Sita, plotted against their peace and made an attempt to kill the princess. She was, however, prevented by Lakshmana, who cut off her nose, whereupon she went away in a great rage to prevail upon her brothers to avenge her loss upon the princely wanderers. Then Rama went out alone with his bow in his hand, and was met by a great shower of arrows, rocks and trees, clubs, darts, and loops of rope, which threatened to catch him by the neck and make him captive like a slave. With wonderful speed, strength, and skill he plied his bow, and the air grew dark with the shade cast by his arrows until at last the giants yielded, but their leader continued the fight unaided. He hurled his ponderous mace at Rama, who cut it in two with his arrows as it sped through the air. The giant uprooted a tall tree, but as it came rushing through the air, it was cut in pieces by the arrows from that wonderful bow. Then an arrow like a flash of lightning sped through the air, and the giant leader fell dead upon the earth. And as he fell, Rama heard above him a peal of drums which spoke of victory, and saw, descending through the air, a shower of roses, lilies, and lotus flowers, which fell gently upon his head and shoulders.